It's a beautiful afternoon here in Southern California. I am recently showered, sporting a wet, still drying mop of hair, but that's okay because I'm hanging out with my dear friend and teammate from the AGE Pro team, Colin Eriksen. Colin, if I had to guess, I would say you are a morning shower.
That is correct. I am similarly recently showered, albeit a little later than usual. It's a bit of an early afternoon now.
Well, then this will be two clean gentlemen on the town. Colin, you are still a fairly recent adapter of Flesh and Blood. This is somewhat of a new game for you, at least newer than it is for me. Tell me about how you got into it.
Yeah, so I started out um, about a year ago now, actually, with this guy, Majin Bay, who is a Legends of Runeterra streamer.
Hmm.
Um, but he kept talking about this game, Flesh and Blood, and I was like, gotta check this out. Because I too was a Legends of Runeterra player and liked a lot of the similar decks and like strategies that he did. Um, so it all started out when I kind of dragged my friend into this, who also had no clue what was going on. We booted up Kalashar and played a game where I was playing, where we basically built decks, and I played Oldhim versus Viserai. Never mind, Oldhim was actually not legal at that point. Never mind that we also had 100 plus card decks because Talishar didn't actually say that was not allowed, and we didn't know the rules. So we ended up playing for like 2 hours, and I fatigued him, which was probably not how that game should have gone down. But
I'm sorry, you were the Viscerai player?
I was the old him.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
um, but it was a fun time nonetheless, and it encouraged me to actually try to maybe get into it. So I got the couple of Blitz decks, got Dorinthia, Arachne, and Oldhim, and played with a couple of friends. I was like, "This is sick." Uh, Searched up online, where do I play this more? And showed up to an armory one night with my Dorinthia Recon Blitz deck, and was like, "Maybe I'll play this." And it turns out probably not the format nor the power level that most people were playing at, but I got this guy, Blake Meyer, who's just incredibly generous. He was like, come on in, let me show you this, and you can borrow my deck. So I ended up playing a Dorinthia like CC legal deck, and I actually did all right. I think I went 2-2, one of which was against a similarly very new player. And I think the other win was against an Azalea who was really struggling to draw some arrow rich hands.
And I'm pretty sure that one of those two losses was to yours truly back when Lexi was still legal, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that was right.
It was an honor to
Um,
play against you on that first Armory day, and since then you've the landscape of Odyssey Armories for you have changed a little bit. In no in no uncertain terms, you're a freaking menace at those armories now, Colin.
yeah, I have. I've gotten pretty used to the scene, and I think I have a solid deck and some pretty solid intuition at getting around a lot of these pretty controlling matchups. We have like this one guy we call him Del Taco. He's on aggro, but a lot of them it's a lot of enigmas. We've got like some guardians.
A
We have
lot of
House Rush now.
assassins.
Athens. Oh yeah, a lot of them switched over to new. I think when Nisvale came out.
So, Colin, you just had a very, very good performance all season long in season 2 of the AGE Open Series. You qualified for the Players' Championship, and that illustrious tournament just happened on September 29th down at Collector Legion in Lawndale. And you performed admirably, I must say. Uh, Before we get into the matchups, the deck, tell me about your overall impressions of the tournament in general.
All right. Well, the Players Championship had a lot of enigmas. That was the first thing I noticed walking in. Um, was the fact that more people were on the deck than I expected, and there were no lightning heroes. Not much aggro. It was just a lot of really controlling decks. Um, and that was kind of where I was off on the predictions. Um, but I think it turned out to be a pretty good event, and like a lot of people, um, both just piloting decks that they've really been comfortable with and grown with over the seasons, as well as a couple people trying to pull in counter picks, kind of at the last minute, trying out new stuff that maybe they're not as comfortable in, but just trying to get the win, especially against that round one opponent, which I thought was interesting.
We talked about the fact that you're kind of young in this game. You're young in general as well, right? How old are you, Colin?
Yeah, I'm 19,
Not
which
old enough to
is
buy a beer, but old enough to destroy everyone in the AGE Open Series.
not quite. Yeah, does not feel young to me, but compared to the flesh and blood scene, it's like it's very different. Um, yeah, I've actually been. I was offered someone offered to buy me a drink when I won a tournament in Minneapolis, and I had to decline. So I'm like, not quite there yet. Um,
Very honest
but
of you, indeed.
yeah.
Colin, this was also your first stint in the AGE Open Series, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
How does it feel to have qualified for the Players Championship on your first go?
feels pretty good. It was quite a journey. I had like the first two tournaments. I was flying. I got like two top eights, one with Bravo and one with Kassai. And then it kind of dipped there for a moment. I was like, oh no, I'm not in top 16 here. We're not. We don't have the points, but I managed to bring it back, and it felt really great. Both just to be able to qualify, and then the actual day where it felt like a kind of a big celebration of everyone there.
And you had a really rough go of it. I mean, as far as gem buddies go, yours probably most consistently ended up being the current reigning. I'm sorry, the ex nationals champion now, Charles Dunn. There were so many times where about round 2 or 3, I would see you sitting across from him in an absolute grind fest of a match.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. He's quite a good opponent, I have to say. And he's definitely knocked me out a couple times. I think I've knocked him out a couple times. But it's always been a super fun match.
Did you have a sense going through these regular monthly tournaments that you were kind of facing off with the best and best of Flesh and Blood, and that you were getting good so quickly?
Not as much early on. I remember that it was kind of joked that when I first played against Charles on stream, like, is anyone going to tell this guy that he's going against a national champion? Because I didn't know. I thought it was just some opponent who I vaguely heard the name of somewhere for some reason. Um, but yeah, I've really grown to appreciate just how good of like a training ground this is, both at AGE and even just locals that I'm going to, where we just have like top notch opponents that really help me learn the game quickly and get good at it.
And get good at it quickly. You absolutely did, Colin. Let's talk about your approach to this tournament, shall we? Your chosen hero was, of course, Kassai of the Golden Sand. You talked about the high density of Enigma in this particular tournament already. How does Kassai feel about Enigma?
So Kasai doesn't usually feel great against Enigma. My impression, kind of when this tournament was like a couple weeks out, was like, I don't know, it's not super great. Especially since my sideboard at the time was like full on just a Zen sideboard. It was I would like to beat that match, and then for some of the other matches, like I can beat New and Enigma. Enigma just didn't quite have the same meta share, and so I didn't really bring too many tools to defeat her, and that meant that the matchup was like not great. And you could see that in actually the past two games I had on stream. One of which was at the Battle Hardened for my winning into top eight, and one of them was in the finals of the July AGE tournament, where I just kind of got smoked both times on Kassai, where I think it was 34-0 and then 33-0. Which slight improvement. We were working on it, but at that point was not quite fast enough. Um, but what I found out was as my sideboard started to shift, and as I could try and bring in a couple more pieces that were actually able to force through damage and kind of get over that wall that enigmas can present. I found that the matchup was still not great, but like okay enough that if I happened to run into, I don't know, one of them, it would be all right.
So, Colin, regardless of what you expected from these players that you know very well throughout the AGE Open series, we knew at this point, before you submitted your deck list, that Zen was essentially a non factor. You knew that the majority of these players would not bring him. You also kind of had an inkling that Enigma was the strongest deck. Give me the elevator pitch for why you then chose to bring Kassai of the Golden Sand to this tournament.
Okay, so um, we kind of had this meta, or at least this meta in my head, where I'm like, okay, so we have Enigma. We're gonna have. I was pretty high on Aurora. I thought she was a very solid deck, and we were going to see a couple of those.
Hmm.
Um, thought we were going to see a few KOs and maybe even something like kind of in that third piece of the triangle. You've got the aggro, you've got Enigma, and maybe you've got New. And I felt like Kassai does pretty good into most of the rest of the field, kind of except for Enigma. So I figured that if I could come into this tournament, especially given my round one pairing who usually played more aggressive decks, I figured that I could kind of, if I could win 2/3 of the matchups and still just try to maybe squeak in one win against Enigma if she happens to come up, I felt pretty confident in Kasai's ability to take that down and to get a good place or even all the way to the finals if these Enigmas are getting picked off by decks trying to prey on her.
You've kind of taken the strategy that Enigmas were employing during the Zen dominant meta, where you just shore up every single other match and
Mm.
abandon the best decks matchup into your deck.
Yeah. And what was helpful is that it wasn't. It was never like I fully had to abandon Enigma because my sideboard was more opened up and I had kind of extra defensive tools. And honestly, I think the list is just like a little bit more refined than before. I felt like the I never had like a 0% matchup. Enigma was the tough one, but um, it was always something that could be winnable, right? And I found that okay, if I can do could be winnable on the on one side and great into the rest of the field, then that seemed like a pretty solid pick.
Well, not only was it winnable for you, Colin, you performed very, very well against some of the best Enigmas in Southern California. We'll get into that a little bit once we go over the matchups. Let's dive into the deck, shall we? It's been a while since people have seen an Enigma list. So let's go over really quickly the core tenant. I'm sorry, Enigma list, Kassai list. Let's go over the core tenets of Kassai's game plan and also the cards that are main staples in this deck.
Okay, so Kasai really focuses on Streak, the Centauri Saber, and the Valiant Dynamo, where every turn you kind of want to be swinging two swords, resetting Dynamo, and already that's like a decent turn. You're getting ideally like maybe 13 or 14 points of value each turn if you can just kind of do that. And then you try to build on that. You try to either have cards like Slice and Dice that can help you go wide, or even just Unsheath for the +3. Unsheath proving to be a bit of an all-star, and we'll talk about that in a second.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second part is the on hits, which is a pretty big way that you could get value out of Kasai because unfortunately doing like 2 card 7 into block 7 is not quite enough to deal with a lot of decks. And the thing that pushes it over is either we're hitting and we're setting up for a blood in our hands turn, or we're hitting and creating gold to set up for something like raise an army. And those two cards are really like the kind of end game combo cards that can really push you over what a normal deck could do and what a normal deck could defend against.
Absolutely. I think there is no better card to kind of encapsulate the Kasai game plan than this one right here, Colin. I think it does all the things that she wants to do, and maybe you can allude to that.
Yeah, so Kassai, like the ideal just like two card hand is a blue and a red Blade Runner, because you're going to be able to attack with the first sword, let's say Hot Streak. Um, that already, that's two damage. It's kind of evasive. It's a little tough to block, and if you block with an attack action, you don't even need to use the Blade Runner. You're just getting a two card six. So it's probably two damage that goes through. You're going to play the Blade Runner, and it's your last resource. You swing a Centauri Saber for five, and that is 7 points of damage. You've reset Dynamo, and you may even get a couple extra points if they happen to, let's say, block an attack action and bump your Centauri Saber up to six, or give Hot Streak go again. And that is like this powerful two card play that Kassai can offer, um, and something that decks really need to have a way to deal with or get around.
And you've showcased just how important it is in your list by running 9 of these bad boys, every single one that you could cram into this deck. Um, Furthermore, it's important to mention that the on hit, one of the on hit potentials for Kassai is, of course, her own activation, and so that tricky 2 card hand you just described could also be advancing a further down the line game plan.
Yeah.
Let's talk about those two um, unfair things that Kassai can do, because as you stated, her raw numbers tend not to be able to get over the top, especially if a deck wants to grind you out. However, you can operate on a bit of a different axis and come out swinging. Let's first talk about Blood on Our Hands.
All right. So Blood in Her Hands is an aggro all star. When you're going against fast decks, think like these lightning heroes, for example, or perhaps even just some of the old rune blades like Viserai or something like KO. Blood in Her Hands is what's going to push you kind of just above rate and above and beyond to match something like a Blood Rush Bellows or Arc Lightning, Flicker Wisp. Because what's going to happen is you're going to be playing your Spoils of War out kind of whenever. You don't even really need attack reactions. If you just go 4 into 2, a lot of aggro decks just can't block that. They're not willing to give up 3 cards, and so you're going to end up piling up some copper tokens. And then what you can do is you have 2 options. One, you take a full hand, you take Blood in Her Hands, maybe some Slice and Dice, Unsheathed, whatever, just attack buffs, and then you're going to play this out, and the magic number is actually 4 copper. Because 4 copper means you choose +1, go again, and attack twice, and you're going to put it all on the Centauri Saber. And that means that off of a blue or a courage, which we'll get to in a second, you can attack for 10 with 2 cards, and plus even more if you happen to be playing all those extra non-attack buffs.
Not
And
bad at all.
that's a pretty solid rate, I would say.
You
Um,
mentioned that all of those buffs should go to the Centauri Saber. Can you tell me why?
Yeah, so basically, the Centauri Saber and the Hot Streak both have pretty relevant on hits, but right now, when you're playing Blood in Her Hands, only one of them will actually be affected because you've already given the sword go again for the rest of the turn. So that's already covered, and that means that Hot Streak doesn't actually get any value if they happen to block with it, and that's why usually you will leave it unbuffed and just send it at the end. Um, Whereas Centauri Saber, you're going to be able to attack for 4, and it's pretty tough to block, because if they block, then attack action, it's going to bump up to 5. And then on that second attack, it's actually going to keep that +1 bonus from the previous attack, because it gets +1 until end of turn. And then you're going to re-attack them. This one's going to be for 5. And then if they block with another attack action, it's going to re-trigger, because this is a different attack, and bump it up to 6. And that means that you're saying, I'm going to have this power turn, and if my opponent wants to block, it's just going to make the power turn bigger. Because if you block with a 3 block attack on the first attack, then it's 3 block, but you've bumped it up by 1 on the first attack, and bumped it up by 1 on the second attack. So you've blocked for 1, which is just not a good rate, and something that the decks just don't want to do.
Certainly not.
And one other play you can do with this is, when you're in these, especially in these like grindy game states where you're both like maybe sub 5, you're able to block with 3 cards, so you're blocking 9, and you have just this card in your hand. or maybe Varsima and you block 12. And you're able to activate Courage of Blade Hold, which is mainly why it's there, Blood in Her Hands, and for one card, you've basically just had a full turn. You sent back 10 points of value, reset Dynamo, and you're going to have tempo for arguably the rest of the game.
So let's talk about the other power card in Kassai's arsenal, which does something very different, albeit still incredibly powerful. This is Raise an Army.
Yeah, Raise an Army is like totally seven. Blood in Her Hands, just a big one turn buff. Raise an Army is a long term game plan that provides ideally basically an unanswerable solution for a lot of these slower decks. Because what it does is it's going to spawn these Centauri Sellsword tokens. And these are allies. They're kind of like dragons, but they can't be popped. And you're going to be able to swing with them every turn, and they're going to essentially also give you health because the opponent just can't really let them go. Usually, you're going to try to raise an army for about 3, and if you can do that, that's 9 extra damage off a blue every single turn until they can deal with it. And if decks don't have go again, let's say, or they need to keep cards in hand because you're sending so much damage, then they're going to really have trouble clearing these, or they're going to be clearing these like one at a time. And that means the first turn, you set 9 damage off the Sellswords, plus your normal turn, which is maybe another 7, let's say. And then they're going to remove 1, and you're going to have a full hand, and you're going to send your full hand plus 6 damage from 2 Sellswords. Then they're going to remove it, and then it's going to be 3 damage off of 1 Sellsword. And that is just a play that goes above and beyond what decks can deal with, or even is just on an axis that they physically can't deal with, like something like Kano, which tends to be a tough matchup. But if they're stacking you, you get these guys out, there are not a lot of ways in that deck to even physically interact with these, even if they wanted to.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Colin, because you mentioned being drawn into this game by Sir Majin Bey himself. You faced off with him at a pretty big event, if I'm not mistaken.
I did. That was in San Francisco. I actually faced off against him twice in that event. The first time, of course, he was on Kano. And the first time, he took me down. But the second time, I brought it back. And really simply, we got the Raised Army for 2 and just overwhelmed him. He couldn't deal with it, and I managed to take him down, which was a pretty sweet moment, I have to say.
Kano, another matchup that is usually really, really hard for Kassai.
Yeah, for sure. Like, Kano does damage in ways that you can't really prevent. You can only really run AB2. You don't actually get to block with cards, which a lot of times you want to block with your yellows, so he disrupts it there. But, I mean, if they're trying to stack you and they want to have that guaranteed game plan, then this is the one key that just knocks that matchup out of the park and is able to get you a win in a normally really tough matchup to navigate.
How did it feel to topple your, I guess, idol, by the way?
It felt good. Like it was. First of all, I was surprised when I like just matched up against it at all, and I'm like, you see the random names, and it's Majin Bey, which by the way is his actual name on Gem. If I'm funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was like it was kind of surreal. Like sitting down, and going, "Oh, yeah, this is the guy you watched when he was explaining how to play the game." And
Yeah.
he was talking about Icelander at the time was actually the main one before she eventually LL'd. But yeah, and then being able to actually knock him out was really cool. And I remember I got up from the table and I glanced over and Evan Bridges, one of my teammates, kind of looked at me and expecting a loss. And I did the thumbs up, and he was shocked. He was kind of celebrating as well. And yeah, it was a sick moment, and also round 1 of the tournament. So just
Wow.
earlier in the morning.
Were you able to mention to Majin that he was an influential part of getting you into the game?
I did, yeah. And he was happy about that. He says he's always happy to hear that he's brought people into the game, and that it's sick that he's been that sort of influence.
That's awesome. So back to Raise an Army after that very fun little detour. one other thing we should mention about this is this probably more than any other card or thing about the Kassai deck is what makes her on hit from her hero ability very something that you absolutely have to respect.
Yeah, the ability to just threaten this is no cards, no like resources from hand. It's just this turn you're going to have to block, or you're going to have to deal with a big problem later down the line. And you can get to scenarios where like that two card hand we talked about, the blue and the red Blade Runner, you're going 2 into 5. You're going to have to commit like 3 cards just even if you have no attack reaction, even if you have nothing, you're even if you're face up, you're getting 3 cards and you've only spent 2, and you just bought yourself tempo in a match that otherwise you normally can't. And that is really something about Kassai that I've enjoyed, and why I've picked it over something like Hatchet Story, is that it can't just be pure numbers turn by turn,
Mm.
because the decks will go, well, I want to do my thing, and um, I want to operate on the unfair axes that I play, and this is what allows you to get around that and say, no, I want you to play my game, where now they have to deal with your attack reactions, and they have to play into your prize, because they just don't want to do it. They don't want to block that 2. They don't want to block 5 with 2 cards.
I'm glad you mentioned unfair axes, Colin, because you've been a massive proponent of this hero for a very long time now. And even when you are not building towards that Raise an Army game plan, you put it so elegantly how Kassai plays with these gold tokens. What are you doing with them when you're not playing them with that powerful card?
Yeah, so when you're not playing them with like something like Raise an Army, what you're instead utilizing is that first part of Kasai's text, which it says, if you draw a card this turn, your sword attacks cost 1 less to activate. So that means that they're free. And so going back to that classic hand, Blade Runner to blue, if you pitch a blue to gold, a card, and you have 1 resource remaining, and you can operate that same 2 into 5, except you've just gained an extra card. Um, so what you can do, especially against aggressive matchups where Raise an Army is not relevant, or maybe you just have so much gold and you'll get to Raise an Army, if you get there you win, but you just want tempo, and you can just say, I'm going to play as if I had 5 intellect instead of 4. And that is extremely powerful, especially if you can chain them together. If every turn I'm going 2 into 5, remake the gold on hit. You don't want to block, because then you're giving me 3 cards. Um, and then you're still able to block 9 and do it again. Like that is something where Kassai just goes above what decks can deal with. It reminds me almost of like the Rangers just sending endless arrow from Arsenal every time, and it's like,
Hmm.
it's going to be a free card every time unless you want to deal with it.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk a little bit about our equipment suite. I think the majority of these are known quantities at this point. One thing I do want to
Mm.
touch on for those non-warrior players here is why Iron Song over Brave Forge Brazers.
Yeah. So versus
Versus
bracers.
versus.
Yeah. um, has been I think a little bit of a tough choice, because they function very similarly. They both 2 block into 1 block. You have temper versus battle worn, but usually that's not too much of an issue. And they both sort of net you 1 point of value. A courage token is going to be +1 later down the line, and the bracers, if you can activate them, that's going to be +1 damage on your next attack. But what really makes this better is just its versatility. That courage token does not have to be um, for the sword you're about to swing
Mm,
right now. It can be for anything. It can be on a 1 card hand, for example, where off of just like a blue, you pitch the blue to verses and you swing, and now you're dealing 2 with a hot streak. They probably can't block the attack actions. Then you swing another 2, and you're able to get a courage token to save for either a big turn where you really want it. You want it for like threatening gold, or it allows you to throw off their game plan by doing something like a CNC for 7, which is a big reason why CNC's in the deck, because it can just that's just too much for decks to deal with. They can't block with any of their 4 block D reacts, and again, it's give me 3 cards, or another benefit is gained. And so a lot of aggro decks and even non-aggro decks, just ones that are running thin on armor, will just have to take the CNC. And
Mm.
that's a major value play and something that Brave Forge Bracers just doesn't give you.
So, Colin, you mentioned that this list has been incredibly refined over your time playing it, and the things that really hint at that for me are these two of inclusions, like the stripping down to one nourishing emptiness. We've got one oasis respite, one take it on the chin, one stroke of foresight, and specifically all of the one ofs in the blue base, which if you go back and watch that game against Peter Budensic, where you were facing elimination, I might add, they
Mm.
they sang. They were absolutely dominant in that game. So let's talk about all of these two ofs and one ofs that are in your deck. Let's go ahead and start off with something that is probably a surprise to people. Why the cut from 3 to 2 nourishing emptiness?
Yeah. So this was a card that I used to be pretty big on, and I was like, of course we got to throw in 3 because it's a powerful on hit effect. If you can get 5 intellect, that's great. But the issue I was running into is a lot of decks have armor now, and they're very easily just able to go like if you're going against KO, you send it in, and it goes okay. I'll block with Sash and Apex Bonebreaker and a card, get a Might, and it's just okay. Or you play against a more defensive deck, like something like a Florian, maybe an Enigma, and they go block the card from hand, de-react from Arsenal, and it just doesn't do as much. And the other reason why this and other cards are like two ofs or one ofs is because you don't really want to draw multiples. If you have multiple nourishings, it really messes you up because you don't even really want to arsenal it
Or
because
block with it?
yeah, or block because then that just messes up the nourishing emptiness text. And so like the best case scenario is okay. I guess I'll block 2 cards, keep the nourishing and a blue in hand, and send like my nourishing from Arsenal. Okay, re-arsenal the nourishing. Wait for another turn where ideally you set up like a go again and an attack, or a go again and a pitch. So like let's say a Blade Runner, that classic 2 into 5, and activate Kassai, so that for a third turn now you set up that second nourishing emptiness. And all that was just a little bit too much to ask, especially on a deck that I think um, really kind of prides itself on ideally being able to operate on however many cards in hand they have left.
Let's next move on to route. And if you could please go into detail about that cheeky little interaction we saw in regards to route, specifically in your game against Peter.
For sure. So yeah, route like 25-80% of the time is when you want to make the gold hit. You want to get a gold and you don't really care about the ideal value play because the gold itself is so much value that you would rather play something that is usually just far too much for the defending player to deal with, rather than 0 costs and hoping you like build up 2 of them. Because what this does is, if they're going to block exactly, this is going to get +3, and it's going to put a card from their hand that was defending back into their hand, which means that you're over by 6, sometimes 5 if they're blocking like a 2 with a 3. And that is crucially over what a D-react solves. And that is what a lot of decks will do. They'll block you, they'll wait for the attack react, and they'll say, okay, I've played my defense reaction, and I didn't, right? And this just says, no, that's not enough. I'm still going to get the gold.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened against Peter is that if you look at the text, it says target weapon attack gains +3, and reprise if the defending hero is defended with a card from their hand this chain link, you may return target non-equipment defending card to its owner's hand. Those aren't actually linked. You still need to have a
Mm-hmm.
target weapon attack. But this can be played on anything. In the case of the game against Peter Vidensic, I went, I believe it was Dispose of War, pitch a blue, attack with a sword, go again. I think he stopped it with some ward. And then I sent Nourishing Emptiness. Now the attack with that Centauri Saber was still on the chain link, just not on this chain link. And he ended up basically he committed like 3 cards. He committed a card to block, and then he pitched a card to play a Waxing Spectre.
Mm-hmm.
So like 3 cards because he really did not want to let this hit. Um, and then I was able to play out the route, target the previous chain link, give that one +3. It's not going to get any extra damage, but that's not as important because I put back what was it was like a Warmonger's Diplomacy. It wasn't that relevant of a card, and put it back into his hand where he didn't really use it that well. And then the Nourishing Emptiness hit, and I was able to get 5 intellect. This also works with Command and Conquer, which I think is even worse for the opponent to deal with because they block 6. You put a card from their hand, you put a card back to their hand, and then they can't play reactions.
Mm-hmm.
So the scene. But yeah, it's a really cheeky interaction and something I learned from Dorinthia players when they would play, what is that, Singing Steel Blade and like Rabbit Pummel,
Mm-hmm.
play a route like this.
So you made a really compelling case for route, but why the only one of inclusion?
Yeah, route is like as a card, it's a little expensive, and I actually did try to go up to 2, but it just didn't quite make it because I it's again it's clunky if you draw it in multiples. You never want to double route something that just it's too many resources for the hand. When you especially if you're trying to go like attack, go again attack. So that made it awkward. It's a red, and then I valued having different attack reactions a lot rather than just like a couple 3-0s because again value isn't always what you're playing towards, or at least turn by turn value.
Mm.
You just want to get the hit. So we have something like 1 route, 1 stroke of foresight. We're going to have 2 in the swing, and that means that opponents just can't really play around everything you have. And so the 1 of route was good enough.
Is there something to be said about the mental factor against your opponent when you have all of these 1-2 of attack reactions too, where maybe they see a route early and then they're thinking about it for the rest of the game?
Right. Yeah. Like as an opponent, especially with like the 2 of in the swing, I feel like I've seen it a bunch of times where they go, "You have the third. I got to play around it," and you don't actually have to have the third. Or with the route where once it blows them out, they're like, "Okay, I couldn't really do anything. Now I need to factor that in because when you activate Kassai, a lot of times then that puts the question to your opponent of do I want to even try to stop this?
Right.
Because in a lot of cases that you don't actually want to, especially if on a 2-card hand I pitched a blue, I attack with Hot Streak, you blocked with a card, gave it go again. I routed the card back to hand, but you still gave it go again, and now I'm getting value, and the card's not even there. It's not even able to defend.
It's that
Uh,
classic question. If I commit
yeah.
now, am I going to regret it later? And generally speaking, when I see you activate Kasai, the thought that goes through my head is he knows this is going to hit.
Mhm. Yeah, like when you have multiple attack reactions, you have a route, and then you have a blade flurry. Like I know this is going to hit, but I still want my opponent to try to defend it because they have to defend so inefficiently. And if you can go, it's attack for 2, block for 3, blade flurry up to 4. I'd have to use a whole D react for this. I guess I will. And then in the second attack, they try to block it out, and you route, and you hit anyway. Like that is just is so much value and so much tempo gained. Even if numbers wise you did like 4 into 10 off a 5-card
Mm-hmm.
hand, which is okay. But
Have you ever been
um,
a poker player, Colin?
um, not too much. I've played a couple like poker nights with some friends. It was like a Texas Hold'em,
Mm-hmm.
and I enjoyed it. I think that there are some similarities here, as I think you're pointing it out.
Definitely.
Um,
I think I tend to think that you would enjoy it.
mhm, for sure.
But okay, so we've already talked about the 2 in the swings.
Mhm.
Let's talk about some more 1-ofs. How about Stroke of Foresight?
Yeah, Stroke of Foresight. It's kind of similar to Route in that it's just another angle you can attack them on because a lot of times opponents will be expecting the second swing to get buffed, especially since in the swing is a zero cost. And this is sort of conditional zero cost if you can turn on the reprise, because you're going to draw a card and make the second sword swing free, which kind of repays for the one cost.
Mm.
Um, but it's not quite as good, and that's why it ends up being a one of. I would like it for the utility of being able to buff the first attack, and it comes in against certain matchups where I might not get the second attack, especially against something like Azalea, where I want to push damage without maybe not having the action point, for example, if I'm under red in the ledger. Um, but yeah, beyond that, this is a card that like probably it would just be too clunky to play too many of them, because opponents just won't defend that first attack when you need it.
Mm. We've also got a one of take it on the chin, which
Yeah,
seems low to me as a layman.
yes. No, I've seen a lot of Kassai lists, and a lot of them are on like the full three taken on the chins, even without like e strikes and like snatches where you're using the agility elsewhere.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, I ended up cutting down to one because it's both really clunky to draw in multiples because otherwise it's just a block two, and then also it wasn't useful in sort of the main proposition that it provides, which is that okay, if I play Take It on the Chin and I have a blue in hand, then I'm blocking two, um, creating an agility, and then I go two into two, and you've reset Dynamo, maybe even activated Iron Song Versus. And the idea is that is 8 points of value. But the issue that I found was that against a lot of decks, you don't really want to be doing that. Either you want to be um, you just want to be sending more damage, like against something like Enigma, where I actually, if I want to be sending two attacks, I want to be sending at least like two into five or something, because two into two is just not enough. And so I'll end up having to like wanting to play a Blade Runner anyway, just for the buff, and then it just becomes a two block. Or it's against something like Victor, for example, where again I want to be defensive, but a lot of times, especially when I'm waiting for Raisin Army, because he doesn't defend too well, so you can usually get gold. Or rather, he doesn't have defense reactions, so you can sneak around him to get gold.
Mm.
Um, I don't want to be forced into playing that agility token. I would rather, if he sends a giant turn, I'll just block 12 and say that's good enough, rather than having to go. I guess I can only block six, maybe seven with Dynamo, and then block two more with Take It on the Chin, and have to try to send two and two, play into his clash cards,
Mm.
and which in turn on Goldmane Estate, and just cause some other issues. So yeah, this ended up being down to a one of. Um, Other small considerations were just that Kassai has a lot of pressure to run different pitch strips of cards. She really wants the blues because that's the what she needs to play a usual turn, and she really wants yellows because that activates her hero ability. So red cards are usually pretty contested spots, and that's why even a classic Kassai card like Outland Skirmish just didn't make the list.
Yeah, I
Even
wanted to
though he,
talk to you about that. I was incredibly dumbfounded to see that it wasn't included in that match against Peter Budensic. I took a glance at your deck list and was like, Spoils of War are the only copper generators in this whole deck?
yeah, and it's been a card that I've tried to include, and it works okay, but it like critically doesn't it misses on a couple key points. And one is that it doesn't provide go again. You really want to be
Mm-hmm.
playing this on something like a three card hand, or more. And then it is a card that you really have to play in the red because against a lot of decks, if you play the yellow and send like a two card four, like that's just not enough for the one copper to be worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then yeah, it just ended up. ended up just not really factoring into the matchups where I needed it to. Like against aggressive matchups, the key number is 4, and 5 doesn't actually help that much. Maybe with a go again, like you can try to turn it into having 4 swings total, and so you're really just shooting for 4. And then against slower matchups, where previously um, I could use that extra copper, and a lot of times they would let it hit. Now the key defensive now the key like defensive matchups that you're going against are either something like Florian, where you just want raise an army. That matchup you turbo to raise an army for 3 and
Hmm.
try to stay in, and it's just not as relevant. Or it's something like Enigma, where you won't get the copper a lot of times, and so it ends up just kind of being a sharpened steel, just a 0 for 3.
Right.
Um, yeah, which is okay, but just I don't know. And I could never quite fit it in over these reds, for example, like over something like a unsheathed, or over something like slice and dice.
And furthermore, it's hotly contested against a brand new card that you alluded to earlier. This is not a two or a one of, but it was one that I really wanted you to talk about. This is Unsheathed.
Yes, unsheathed is the 31, 32, 33rd go again plus attack card in the deck. There are a lot of them. But this one does something that is just a little bit better than a lot of these other cards. Namely, that it is 0 cost and pretty much unconditional. Stuff like, let's see, this round's on me, or frailty can interrupt it. But usually it's going to be a buff on the first sword, um, and it is going to be 5 into 2, just the same as a red Blade Runner, but critically you have that extra resource. And that allows you to either um, do this with pitching a yellow if you need to, do this, go 5 into a Command and Conquer or a Nourishing Emptiness, and that's a 3 card 11, and that feels really good. Or even against like Illusionist, you can now go 5 into Hit Spectra, where previously, when you're playing Blade Runners and run throughs, you only hit them for 2, and then all that buffed attack is wasted trying to hit Spectra. So this just ended up being a really solid card, um, that could be played in kind of any hand. You can use it as a go again if you just want to have it as a sharpened steel, just a +3 to extend the turn. You're usually very happy to play that. And he even opened up like larger lines where on something like a 5 card hand, you go, let's say, Spoils of War, pitch a blue, attack, unsheathe, attack, and then CNC, or like a Nourishing. And even in that line, you can versus the second swing with the unsheathed, so that if they don't defend it out, then the CNC is coming in for 7. And that was something that you just really couldn't do in Kassai, or just couldn't do as efficiently.
Fearsome. You talked about earlier the fact that you were able to devote more slots to Enigma with the fall of Zen. This was one of the ones you mentioned to me on the day of the tournament. Talk to me about Iron Song Determination.
Yeah, Iron Song Determination is a card that is slightly below ranked if you're just getting up 1 damage, but crucially, it's a yellow block 3 that can help you just push damage when you want to hit them and you need to hit them. If you can hold back 1 card and even just throw something like a 6 or 8 dominate, like that is usually enough to break through a lot of these like spectral shields and ward auras, and it can be good enough to break through some other defensive matchups like assassin, where they don't want you to hit but maybe don't have like ward or other prevention effects. And it just ended up being like a solid card that was never dead. It was never something like um, with something like route, or even other things I've tested like push forward. You're dedicating your turn to doing that, or you're dedicating like a bigger hand. Whereas this, if I ended up getting it stuck in hand, like let's say I did a I pushed a lot of damage. My opponent kind of blocked out, and now I've drawn this up. It's still okay. It's still a card. It's zero cost. It doesn't interrupt the curve, and I can play out. Um, and I mean, half the time you play it out, it turns on the Kassai ability so that you can
Mhm.
activate it that turn. Um, and so it ended up being a solid card. One that could definitely like see changing, not just because of its not because it's like a terrible card, but just because all cards can fill this spot. But overall, like this just seemed like the best one for the job. And although I didn't actually end up getting too much use about it out of it in the tournament, I found a lot of use in testing, and I think that it's definitely helped carry some games where I just needed a hit.
All right, now we turn to what I think is the most exciting part of this little exercise that we're doing. And that is the ones and two of the flavorful blues that you have in this deck. And the reason I'm so excited about them is because I see you go longer with this deck than any other deck in the room. I mean, like, case in point, your first round matchup against Moises Lopez went to the last card in your deck. And so these blues, especially when you're playing to a pitch deck, end up being incredibly influential. So let's talk about one that absolutely sung against Peter Rudensik. This is Emboldened Blade.
Yeah, Emboldened Blade. Um, so yeah, your blues in general. I have 19 of them, which is a little high for a Kasai deck list usually, but you really want to guarantee that blue, like every single turn. And so second cycle, you're going to be drawing up blues, and you need to be able to do something with them. Emboldened Blade is a one of because again, it literally does nothing for you multiples. But this helps break through. Honestly, its best use case is probably right there in the video,
Mm-hmm.
where I pitched a gold, drew this card, and played it against Enigma, and I hit a defense reaction. And not only did I kill a defense reaction, which is 4 points of value, I got +1, and that meant that with exactly 5 into 4 into 2, that was too much, and he had to give up the mirror guy, which is just tremendously important in that matchup. That first mirror guy and that first turn where he really wants to defend it is like crucial to the game, and you can lose games just by not being able to kill it.
A mirror guy, by the way, Colin, that had already swung twice.
Yes, yeah, it was a mirror guy, and then he did Sacred Art and got a bunch of Spectral Shields. He had Defenders, um, and so on this turn, I needed something to break through, and it was this card and Blood in Our Hands, a card that usually isn't an all-star in that matchup, but with a little bit of copper from those earlier on hits, and this card was able to force through just a turn and completely swing the tempo. Where now he needs to completely rebuild. He just couldn't do that. I had survived the 2 turns along with the help of Shunts, which we'll talk about in a bit. Um, I had about 20 life, and it just opened up so many possibilities because it just gave me the time and the space I needed to operate.
Okay, another one that is really influential in the end game. This is Overpower.
Yes, I've killed many opponents with the blue overpower at the end. It is basically like your one big pump in the blue slot that you ordinarily wouldn't really play around. But yeah, in the end game, a lot of times you're going to be swinging 2 into 3, 2 into 2, and you're going to have extra cards in hand because you just have your hands will be all blues. And this is a card that has pushes through damage, and crucially, pushes through damage in a time where you're pretty confident your opponents will be blocking, because in those end game states, it's a lot about like cards in deck, and it's a lot about I know I'm going to give you 2 cards, and that's okay because then I can send back a turn. And Overpower says basically no, you're going to either have the D react or a lot of times lose the game because you're going to be on a couple HP, and it's won me everything from way back in February against a Victor. all the way to being played in the last turn of the game against Peter on Enigma and clearing his whole board of shields so that the Nourishing Emptiness could sail in for the win.
Amazing. A really valuable addition to a blue slot in any deck that could run it, I would imagine. Let's talk about Heart of Fiendal, Colin. And I want to start with a thought exercise here. How many points of life do you think you've gained off of Heart of Fiendal in your entire career?
Entire career. This I've played quite a few games with this deck, both online in testing,
Give me a
as well as
wild guess.
yeah. So we're talking like I think like above 100 because this card puts in work against like seemingly unwinnable fatigue matchups and helps kind of equalize the damage numbers that unlike no other. Like in end games, like against let's say Enigma, for example, like random deck, uh, he's going to be attacking with 2 spectral shields. You block a card with one of them, the second spectral shield comes in for 2, your dynamo blocks one, and your heart is going to heal the other. And just like that, you're only losing one card out of deck. And because Kassai almost always wants the blue, she wants a blue every turn to be playing her go again and attacking twice. The non-block part of it just isn't that relevant. And so you'll see that it's a part of the main board. It doesn't come out because it's just like so consistent as your blue pitch, and sometimes more. Sometimes it gains you one. It helps in aggro matchups. It can help when you're getting like kind of locked out of the game by like little ping effects. Things like, for example, I don't know, Kodachis, or we've seen it where opponents will be setting up towards like a reckless swing or something, and this can bring you out of range. And it just ends up being 4 points of value in a pitch card, which is just not something you can see anywhere else. And I'm a big proponent of this card. I think more decks should be running it. If you can, it's a Fable. Obviously, it's kind of expensive. I happen to be actually borrowing fellow teammate Anthony Pham's Heart of Fiendal for that exact reason.
Are
Um,
If I tried to pick
yeah.
up this list tomorrow, but I didn't want to drop the however many bones it is at this point for a Heart of Fiendal, am I kidding myself, Colin?
I mean, hey, like I'd encourage anyone to play the deck. If you need to make a couple swaps, do it. But I think that for a tournament list, if you can find one, if you can borrow one, I would really recommend it because it saved me so much, and the one in 60 chance that you happen to draw this off of gold is so low that it's totally worth it. If you had to replace it, maybe throw in a second blue overpower, or something like a third blue precision press. Just more either like go again or like end game kind of push cards that would help you, really help you out there. But if you can,
Okay, Colin, I do want to go ahead and run through the rest of this because it's really important to me that we get to your matchups. Before we do, are there any last notes you want to give on your particular spin on Kassai?
yeah, let's maybe talk overall about if we can scroll up maybe even a little bit more.
Yeah.
Red count, yellow count, and blue count.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, these and I touched on this a bit, are ones that you really have to be careful about. You're going to need enough yellows that you're able to pretty consistently activate your Kassai hero ability, and you're going to want enough blues that you're going to have one blue per hand. So my list is going to be a little bit higher on blues, and it is a little higher on yellows purely because um, I need to hit these certain benchmarks, one blue per hand, and the ability to activate Kassai, you know, early on and when I draw these attack reactions. Um, and that's where you're going to see these numbers compared to some other lists. I believe um, one that I was looking at has like something more like 14 yellows and like 15 or 16 blues. And while I've certainly tried that out, I think that The extra consistency matters so much more than the couple points that you gain by having, let's say, a red defense reaction or maybe another red 0 for 3 compared to these yellows or blues.
We can't see it here, but I believe your personal copy of this list has a. I don't even want to posit a guess to the number of games on Talishar that you've got, so I'm very inclined to believe you on this point. So at this point, every hopeful Kassai, go ahead and take a screenshot of these ratios: 22 reds, 18 yellows, and 19 blues. Thanks so much for taking us through that, Colin. Let's talk about more specifically your day at the Players Championship. Um, we talked about the fact that you're a little bit nervous about Enigma coming into this, namely because two nights before the event, we released the deck list, and lo and behold, there's 5 Enigmas in this pool of 16 players. And you ran into a fair bit of them, including in round 1 against Moises Lopez, who, like you said before, is typically an aggro player.
Yeah, this was kind of unexpected. I was expecting him KO. Maybe he tries some of the like a lightning hero, like Aurora or something. But I didn't expect him on Enigma, and I think he changed to Enigma maybe even just because of this exact matchup because he knew that Enigma was pretty solid into Kassai and pretty solid into the rest of the field. But we ended up playing, and it was a grind. We got there in the end, but yeah, quite literally, it was a last card in deck. I played Precision Press, pitching my Heart of Fiendal, um, and with no cards in deck, no other cards in hand, to attack for 2 piercing, go again into a Centauri Sellsword for 3, and a Tunic counter to attack for another 2, and that was the game because he couldn't quite get there. Um,
A game that
and
outlasted a 9 of Count Your Blessings Riptide versus Florian, by the way.
man, I talked to Talon, the Riptide player, after it, and he told me he was sweating because he was like, man, our game is going to take forever. I don't want to hold everyone up. And he glances over, and Moises and I are just grinding our decks down to every last point of value we can get out of them. And yeah, it was quite a thriller of a match, even if it was a lot of back and forth and a lot of sending on rate attacks to try to just maximize value.
So you faced your fears. You sat down in front of Enigma. You made it through. Thank goodness. Maybe you can dodge them for the rest of the tournament. But alas, round 2, here comes team captain and number 1 seed at the tournament, Christopher Ayali, sporting yet another Enigma list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a little tough. There's 5 out of 16, and I've already faced one, so now it's 4 out of 15 or 4 out of 14 really, because I'm one of them. But yeah, we hit another Enigma, and it does not go well. My deck just doesn't really draw well. He starts first because he's higher seed, which is generally not something you want to see. You want to go first in these matchups to prevent setup on board. And then he just kind of runs me over. I think the ending life totals was like 27-0 because he just early on slammed the mirror guy, had the restless coalescences to protect it, and just rode that to victory. So I was definitely a bit bummed. Fortunately, I had a bit of time to go get like some of the catered Chipotle because the last round was all the way up until the end. Um, but yeah, that was a tough round, and fortunately, there were only 3 Enigmas left. So I was like, surely we can dodge a couple more.
And we'll get to the Shirley in a minute. But your next round was against Fuzzy Delp on this copy paste of Yuki Lee Bender's 6-0 Swiss Florian list. How do you feel in this matchup overall?
I feel all right, and I think I don't blame Fuzzy for copy pasting Yuki Lee Bender's list. I think it's a pretty solid list, and yeah, but I think that in the matchup, this is Turbo Raisin Army. This is I actually I ended up just cutting the attack actions, cutting all the anything that just doesn't synergize with it, because I knew I need to get my gold, and I need to get online before he got online, and he got his hero ability, and he starts slamming either just germinates or outvalues me with all the Earth Majestics, the Fellings, the Plow Unders, and that was just exactly what happened. We ended up just kind of we got like a one gold early on. We started with a gold because of our Crown Dominion, and we ended up pulling out one more. And I think like the next turn, played out Raisin Army after a little bit of disruption. He had some, I think, like a felling of the Crown, and just kind of rode that to victory. Like we had, I played Raisin Army, did the big attack, and next turn actually, I don't think I drew a go again, which is really unfortunate.
Oh
So
no.
we just set like a CNC and pass, but yeah, we ended up. I ended up just kind of like just continually putting pressure on him, and he ended up basically going, I think, for a line where it was like he's just going to send damage face at me because the it's just too much value wasted if he's sending a felon in the crown at a sellsword. Um, and I was able to hang on and have enough life to just keep swinging. And that just got him in lock, and he couldn't survive the sellswords. So I was 2-1 round three. One more win is a win in a top eight.
Absolutely. But then, in the hopes of punching your ticket to top eight and avoiding that last elimination round, you ran into Grant Strom on new, who was another one of our top eight contenders. How did that match go?
Yeah, that match. I think usually I'm like pretty confident in the
I would have
Kassai
thought
versus.
so.
Yeah, like it's new doesn't quite have the fridge to put under like gold threatening attacks, and you're very comfortable playing on like low card hands, so her disruption doesn't do as much. But I think he and the rest of the people that I played against played it very well and was able to just string together these chains that I just couldn't effectively deal with. He did something like Mistblade into Bonds of Agony. I blocked 6, survived it, and then he still went levels of enlightenment into E Strike for 7 after I had already given a lot of my hand. Um, and was able to just kind of continually do that. His looking for a scraps really came in handy to just kind of keep me off of my game plan, and I could just never quite set up a win. And then he ended up kind of fatiguing me, kind of damage fatiguing me, honestly, and was able to push damage with the daggers and actually a couple of my own blues that I had to play just for the ratios.
So at this point, it's a good time to remind everybody how this player's championship worked. The magic number was 3, either for wins or losses. Everybody sits down at table 1, ready to play, all at 0-0. The second you get 3 wins, you advance directly to the player championship, and you don't have to play the rest of Swiss, which was the case for Chris Ioli and teammate Evan Bridges. However, if the second you face or you reach 3 losses, you are asked to leave the building and are no longer in contention for the crown. You have battled your way through Swiss at this point, and you are in the final round where every single player that remains in the pool is facing elimination. And lo and behold, surely you could avoid them, but instead you sit down against the third Enigma of 5 in this pool of 16.
Yes, I facing off against Peter Budensic, and not only that, Justin comes up to me and says, we'd like to direct you to the feature match. And you're going to be playing this on stream. So for all the marbles, I had to get my revenge on stream against Enigma in the winner into top 8, just like the previous match on stream against Enigma over at Battle Hard in San Diego. And uh, I was a little worried, to put it
And
lightly.
and before we get into how the actual match went, Colin, there was a moment before the tournament started where Justin and I needed a couple bodies to line up the cameras, and it just so happened to be you and Peter who were the early arrivals and were those
Yeah.
available bodies. Can you tell me a little bit about the conversation you had with Peter?
So I ended up kind of talking with Peter, and they asked us, "Hey, just pull out your deck and just play a few hands." My deck was entirely pitch and name ordered, so I was drawing up 3 Steelblade Shunts into 3 Spoils of War. So the game itself was not super great. I think Peter had a similarly ordered deck. But I ended up just kind of asking him offhand about like, does anyone like play Kassai, or like is anyone tested with her? Because to me, I think Kassai is a pretty decent deck, but like you hear nothing about her. She's not seen in like tournaments or even in a lot of discussions. And he kind of says like, no, I mean the fact that you kind of auto lose to Enigma, I mean like it's an 80-20 matchup minimum. Um, and I just kind of go, yeah, okay, okay, you know. I don't want to like directly kind of go against him at that point and be like, no, no, it's great. But I was just like, okay, you know,
A little bit
I
tongue
heard
in
the
cheek, though, huh?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And of course he brought Enigma that day. But what I didn't think about at the time was that we were going to match up, and we were on stream. He was going to see if he could prove that Enigma was indeed really tough to beat for Kassai, and to see if he could close that easy 80-20 matchup.
And so how did the
And
match go, Colin?
well, it did not quite go so well for him. I think that matchup was was just a really great showcase of what Kasai can do. You know, I had okay draws off gold. I had okay um, kind of threats, but if you are able to threaten and on hit every turn, if you're able to make it so that he has to block on hands where he has ward and where he doesn't have ward because you're threatening copper or gold, um, you're able to put him in a position where um, he has to go for the mirror guy, and if he can't, and he just couldn't quite defend it, and from there he was just on the back foot for the rest of the game. We were threatening damage, and he ended up going down really low to try to set up um, to set up some key ward plays. And 3 turns in a row, we played Steelblade Shunt and ended the turn right there, even shunting a mirror guy, which I have to say felt amazing.
Yeah, I don't doubt it. It looked amazing while we were on stream as well. That was, I got to say, probably my favorite game to cast of the entire event. Just because
Yeah.
you are so much the underdog, and also as well because of that little conversation you had with Peter early on in the morning. Because I know you can get there. I never count you out, Colin.
For sure.
Okay, so you are at a positive win rate against Enigma. You made it to the top 8. Massive congratulations to you. We're feeling good. We had a great stream game. Surely we don't run into the 4th out of 5 in top 8.
Yeah. But
And alas.
and you know what? Despite the fact that we ran into Enigma again for 4 out of 6 games total in a 16-player event, only 5 of which are Enigma. Um, but yeah, we weren't quite able to get there. It was a super good game. We ended up just kind of playing everything like I think the game went well for both players. Ended up surviving that initial mirror guy turn, and then tried to set the Raisin Army. He used his last Phantasmaclasm to bottom my Raisin Army to delay it a little bit. But unfortunately, he killed me with his last non-chi card deck in the form of CNC to close it out to secure his spot in the top 4. But yeah, I think that match could have gone either way. It was a nail biter.
There was a lot of really good back and forth in that matchup. I was on break, so I got to catch a good portion of it. I want to talk about a moment. I think it was his first or second Phantasmaclasm where you didn't have any poppers in his hand. And so I think he bottomed like a yellow slice and dice. Do you remember what happened after that?
Well, he bottomed one of them, and it finally happened. I managed to draw up a popper, and we popped Phantasmaclasm, and just like that, 9 damage was gone. And, that was satisfying. I don't think I've done that against him yet, so getting able to actually slam one and just pop it, regain tempo, so amazing.
As a non-illusionist player, all I can do is raise my fist in revenge against all the illusionist players that have messed my hands up with Phantasmaclasm.
For sure.
So this then ends your pursuit for the crown at the Players Championship, but nevertheless, you are at a 50% win rate, leaving the tournament against the best Enigmas probably in Southern California, certainly in the room that day. which is no small feat. Even though you brought these two knives, hot or sharp though they may be, it was definitely you were definitely the underdog here, Colin. How does it feel to have shown the mettle of this Kassai list?
It feels great. I think that like walking out of the tournament, even though we got stopped in top eight, like I felt great. I feel like the deck performed really well. I think I performed very well, and like especially with the match on stream, I was like I was finally able to show what Kasai can do against these meta heroes, and especially yeah to kind of get my revenge there and get a win against the terror that was Enigma.
You've been peddling the wares of this Kassai list for as long as I've known you, I think. And to see you really put an exclamation point on your point,
Mm.
what was vindicating to see. Colin
Yeah.
Eriksen, even though you had a good tournament run here, are you still thinking that Kassai is the answer for you in the current Rosetta meta?
Um, I think she's in a solid spot. I've definitely been trying other decks. I myself have played a bit of Enigma, and may also try that out. I think my headspace currently is that she's not the answer to the meta because the meta currently is draft this weekend. So right now I'm focused on purely Rosetta heroes. But yeah, for CC, I think that if you want to bring her, and I might bring her to the tournament, and I think it would be a solid choice that I think can really answer a lot of the room and just always have a chance. You're never out. You never sit down and go, okay, no, that's it. Like some decks have to do. And I think it makes her just a blast to play no matter what happens.
Colin, it's been a massive boon to me to watch you grow as a player and to watch your run in Arcane Games and Events Season 2. Will you be back for Season 3?
Absolutely.
Well, you heard it here first. Folks, the Lisan Al Gaib of Kasai of the Golden Stand will be returning next year. So stay tuned to the Arcane Games and Events YouTube channel for plenty more content and also for more Colin Eriksen. He'll be back next year along with your regular cast of characters. For now, congratulations once again, Colin, for your amazing run and your awesome performance at the Arcane Games and Events Players Championship. Until next time, thanks for being here.